I remember I was about 5 or 6 the first time I really played a video game. Growing up, I had 3 older sisters, and my youngest sister and I shared a room with a bunk bed, and my 2 older sisters had their own room. I remember in their room they had 2 what seemed like giant beds that my sister and I would jump on and go back and forth, and they had brown shagged carpeting, and they had a dresser that seemed so big and so long, where they had their jewelry and clothings, with the back pane being a giant mirror. And next to that dresser was a brown cabinet, and inside it was a bunch of VHSs adorned with a big hulking TV that had oval-shaped buttons with green text that you'd have to press down and click in to get it to work. And I remember on Fridays I would use that room and I would be able to watch new cartoons that just came out. And always connected to that TV was a Sega Genesis console. And that was the first console that our family ever had, and the first one I ever used to play games.
I don't remember how our family obtained this system. I don't think anybody in our family remembers. But I do remember all the games I played. I remember my dad and I playing racing games. I remember my sisters needing to help me out with the disappearing blocks in Sonic 3. Look, as a kid, it was really hard to do, alright? Have a 5-year-old do it. It's not gonna go well. One summer, while visiting my aunt's house, I went to see my cousin. He was in the basement, and I remember walking down the long, red, creaking staircase, past the unfinished basement where the hulking old heater was, and walked into his room, where he was playing a game. A video game the likes of which I've never seen before, and that would change me forever. I saw a large Italian man in red, in a mine, punching bombs. But he wasn't actively fighting them. He and the bombs were taking turns attacking each other. Something clicked in my brain that day, and Super Mario RPG, no, RPGs were etched into my soul, to be a part of me. From then on, whenever I went to my aunt's house, I would play Super Mario RPG on my own save file, along with other wonderful games on the SNES library. Sometime after that, my sister and I woke up from our rooms one morning to go see our mom, who was sitting in the kitchen like normal, reading her newspapers and drinking her coffee like always. She turned to us and said, "There's a surprise downstairs." I vividly remember the race between my sister and I as we pushed and shoved our way downstairs, bursting open the basement door to see, before our eyes, a TV stand with our very own Super Nintendo system, complete with all of my cousin's games. He apparently sold the system and the games to my mom to buy a PlayStation. My sister and I had a blast that day going through all those games to check them out and play them for ourselves. Super Mario World, Joe and Mac, Power Rangers, and more. It seemed like we played all day. From then on, video games have been a part of my life. I like to play them, I read the manuals, I read the guides, I dreamt about them, I draw them when I could. Games helped me learn how to read, problem solve, and communicate with people. A lot of my friends were made about bonding over them. It wouldn't be an understatement to say that video games helped shape who I am today. Nothing fascinated me more than the RPG genre though. When I did go to see my cousins, I'd almost exclusively play Final Fantasy VII or 8 on their new PlayStation. I thought those games were an amazing experience, something almost alien, otherworldly. When I eventually did inherit his PlayStation, I got really into those games. So much so that I'd act them out with pen and paper. It was clear that video games were in my blood at this point, and RPGs were in my soul. I knew what I wanted to do for a career. I wanted to make games, and I was going to do whatever it took to make that happen. It took me 6 years to finish college.
So I did have 2 pages written down of me talking about college, my experience with it, the lack of help I actually got from the college, but I think this part pretty much sums it up. During my senior year of college, I was told, "Hey, we're discontinuing our computer science program. But to make it even, just take Intro to Computer Science and we'll give you your degree." So in the end, I did get my degree for computer science. Now I was able to enter the wonderful world of game.
Oh no, the entire industry is on fire, turnover rate is the highest it's ever been, and there is no such thing as job security.
A few years later.
The entire industry is still on fire, turnover rate is the highest it's ever been, and there is no such thing as job security. Now I was working as a software engineer. I had nothing to do at my current job now because all the software I developed and worked on was working as expected. So I was upgraded to IT manager, working on help desk tickets. I was listening to songs on YouTube Music while working when I heard this song. A song I never heard before but immediately could identify as an RPG song. The guitar, the drums, the wooden crackling of the bass, the idea of fighting in a dangerous forest, the sound of the weird theremin thingy. I looked at the cover of this album, a miniature world that we only got a glimpse of. Gigantically shaped potions next to a miniature house, mixed with nature, clay, and glass. The entrance to the front room door, covered in water next to a swing set.
I don't know how to explain it better than vibes, but this music just screams fantasy RPG vibes. I had to know what game these songs were from, and the answer to that is pretty surprising.
So, there's not much, if any, information on the artist in terms of US knowledge. But in Japan, he seems to be pretty popular. Moselle, somebody who's made dozens of albums in this style. His Mosegaku albums being notorious for capturing this adventuring fantasy style with limited usage on what tools and instruments are being used to keep a cozy and fantastical feeling to them. Each one tells the story of an adventure, a great journey that takes the listeners through humble beginnings, vast fields of greens and beaches adorned with shells, bitter battles and grand endings. These albums being so popular that they've been remixed numerous times by Moselle himself and fans, with officially released albums by Moselle that contain exclusive fan compositions of his own tracks. Moselle is somebody who has a style uniquely his own, and I'd encourage those interested to check out Mosegaku albums if they want to know more. So, I found the artist, and now I had to know what games these songs were from. And the answer to that? It's nothing. There is nothing. The game does not exist. It's an album to the perfect RPG that doesn't exist. And that got me to thinking, what would an RPG in this world be like? I thought about this idea a lot. These tiny buildings and structures. Who lives there? Do they know how small they are compared to everything? How do they survive in that type of world? What if there was a game to these songs? What if I made it? So I began working on such a game. A world where mankind was unknowingly shrunk to miniature scale and put in a diorama to be observed, to be safeguarded against their own destructive prowess. Where, when encountering monsters, they're to scale. Rabbits are hulking abominations that could wipe out villages. Regular-sized birds could easily carry their prey away without any resistance. And against all odds, heroes of that story were able to overcome such obstacles, break out of their prison, and retake their freedom. I decided to name the game after the song that inspired me to make it in the first place. Banard, a word that could mean forbidden tale. But once I made an early build of this project, I realized that this concept would be impossible to pull off. Since I didn't have the skill to make great art assets, I realized I couldn't go for that miniature-like art style. So the art and story would have to be changed to support the existing pre-made art assets. With some motivation and help from my friends, I continued working on the project. I was the sole programmer, designer, writer, marketer, and social media manager, and producer. I worked on this project daily for 3 years, putting in over 18 to 2,000 hours to work on this. And I know what my time spent on Steam says, but you also have to account for writing and marketing and social media management, creating a Kickstarter, making and editing promotional videos, and going through Steam's application process and store creation page, along with getting custom character and monster art. I'll get more into the details of the story of Banard later, but the game contains almost 200 maps, about 70 enemies, 42,000 words, that's the same amount of words as the Fight Club in the Notebook, and over 2,000 map event triggers on top of 150 different plugins that I have to manage. I created a custom and unique combat system that allows characters to change and learn new skills depending on what crystals they have equipped. After 3 long years of spending every single waking moment thinking about and working on this game, I was ready to release it to the world. To show them my creative battle system, my harrowing story, and my heartfelt characters. It was a complete and utter failure. So the Kickstarter I mentioned before was a flop. Any and every attempt to advertise or market my game resulted with no click-throughs and me being banned from the JRPG subreddit. Since I was an unknown dev, nobody wanted to playtest or stream my game demo. Nobody at game dev conventions wanted to try it either. And I got rejected from Nintendo to port this onto the Switch. Now, I wasn't expecting a breakout hit from Banard, but I thought my game would do okay. My goal was 1,000 copies at most, and I didn't even reach a fraction of that. The little comments or feedback that I did receive was positive. People liked the story, characters, and gameplay. The handful of people who did test it said that the writing style was very much me, which is great. The climax of the story beats were well received too, but outside of a handful of people that checked it out, I got little to no interaction. Doing a post-mortem on my game, as of this video, the amount of people who saw my game searching the store page were about 3,700. And out of those, only 600 people clicked onto my store page. That's a click-through rate of 16%, meaning that only 4 out of 25 people clicked to the store page. Now, I can be objective about something that's personal to me. Was my game perfect? Yes. Did it have issues? Of course! Besides the general issues that come into play with selling your game on the Steam Marketplace, or using an engine like RPG Maker, which I can make an entire video about, I can think of a few issues with Banard that would strongly impact its sales performance. Mainly, the grammar and the art. Now, since I'm talk you two on here, it's harder to notice any grammar or spelling mistakes with a video format. But with Banard, I knew I had issues with my game's dialogue. So I tried to fix it up by checking it through MS Word, Grammarly, and Quillbat. Then I paid 2 different people to grammar/spell check my game. And then I had my friends go through all of it again. But I still had a bunch of issues. To that point, I don't know what I could have done more on my end. The only other thing I could think of was to pay a professional to go through everything again, which would cost me about $8,000 to $10,000. Which seemed unreasonable given how much I already put into fixing this as it is. The second, and I think the more prominent issue, was the visuals. If you're an inspiring developer and have watched up to this point, the one thing you need to make sure you take away from this video is to have a distinct visual art style. Do not use pre-existing assets. I learned the hard way that people only care about the contents of the game once they see the game. And to see the game, you have to stand out in a thumbnail-sized image against thousands of other thumbnail images. I knew this was a problem going in, and I thought I had a solution that would meet people halfway. I had to choose between custom tile assets for the game, or custom monster and character sprites. I chose the latter as I thought the combat would be where the main juice of the game was. And people familiar with RPGs would be more interested in this cool stump monster and an ant with a spear instead of a default slime for the 50th time. The same with the character sprites. I commissioned them to make sure that they'd show off the characters' personalities better in combat. I couldn't be happier with the outcome. They were perfect and fit the pre-existing art style, but nobody cares if the game has unique art assets. They care that the game looks unique. So I spent 3 years of my life working on my dream project that nobody will play. Something that I genuinely put my heart and soul into. That I worked on almost entirely on my own. Spending months and months on designing maps, writing a narrative, fleshing out these characters, coding unique gameplay mechanics. Spending hours and hours of fixing minor bugs, animation or programming issues, many of which the players won't notice, but I would, and I would want those to be fixed. Trying to promote something that I think has worth, has value, only for its release to be met with a deafening silence. Of somebody blinking at this screenshot, seeing that nothing stands out to them, and then moving on. What do I do now? Well, before I answer that, I'd like to talk about Banard. Well, the story of Banard and the characters in that story.